Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for March 24th, 2025. LDS Daily recently shared the following post on their Facebook page that says, "Navigating the evolving teachings shared in General Conference can be challenging, especially when cultural shifts or changing policies seem to conflict with long-held beliefs. In this article, we explore how to recognize the difference between eternal doctrine and inspired counsel, and offer practical advice to help you stay grounded and increase your faith during times of change. One area where cultural expectations and doctrinal principles sometimes intertwine is in discussions of modesty and temple garments. Over the years, the Church has adjusted garment designs to better suit members' needs, including fabric changes, maternity styles, and comfortable fits. Most recently, the announcement of sleeveless garment tops has sparked discussion about how these changes align with traditional teachings on modesty. For many years, Latter-day Saint culture has linked modesty to covering the shoulders, with many members understandably assuming that this was a fairly bedrock, unchanging standard. However, the introduction of sleeveless garments challenges that assumption. If garments are a sacred and personal expression of covenants, and they now accommodate sleeveless styles, does that mean that standards about covered shoulders are more flexible than some believed? This change highlights an important truth. While modesty is a principle of the gospel, specific clothing standards have evolved over time based on cultural norms rather than unchanging doctrine. It invites members to focus less on rigid rules and more on the underlying principles of respect, reverence, and personal commitment to sacred covenants. Did you catch that? They said Latter-day Saint culture has linked modesty to covering the shoulders. No. Prophets and apostles, men, have linked modesty to covering the shoulders by speaking about it over the pulpit and publishing it in official church manuals. Stop gaslighting us. The article goes on to say, as the Church continues to adapt to the needs of its worldwide membership, recognizing the difference between cultural traditions and eternal truths will help members approach change with faith and understanding. Another example of the difference between cultural and doctrinal teachings, specifically in General Conference, is President Gordon B. Hinckley's guidance on earrings. In a 2000 devotional address to young adults, later referenced in General Conference, President Hinckley counseled Latter-day Saints to avoid tattoos and for women to wear only one pair of modest earrings. He shared this as a standard that reflects respect for our bodies. There is undoubtedly value in sincere and faithful adherence to the guidance of our prophets and trusted leaders, and many sisters responded to President Hinckley's address by immediately removing their extra earrings. However, 25 years later, the conversation around earrings and personal appearance has shifted. This example highlights how cultural teachings, though often inspired and beneficial, are not eternal doctrines. President Hinckley's message encouraged obedience and personal commitment to prophetic counsel. Let's read exactly what he said as a reminder. The First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 have declared that we discourage tattoos and also the piercing of body for other than medical purposes. We do not, however, take any position on the minimal piercing of the ears by women for one pair of earrings, one pair. Okay, so what this article is saying is that if a prophet of God stands up and says, the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 have declared, we can just write that off as culture. Noted. Also on the subject of doctrine, let's read a small selection from the book Doctrines of Salvation, page 87. Side note, you can read these books in a PDF version for free online if you are in the mood to feel like poking your own eyes out. Here's the passage. Birth control is wickedness. The abuse of this holy covenant has been the primary cause for the downfall of nations. When the sacred vows of marriage are broken and the real purpose of marriage abused, as we find it so prevalent in the world today, then destruction is inevitable. No nation can endure for any length of time if the marriage covenants are abused and treated with contempt. The anger of the Almighty was kindled against ancient nations for their immorality. There is nothing that should be held in greater sacredness than this covenant by which the spirits of men are clothed with mortal tabernacles. When a man and a woman are married and they agree or covenant to limit their offspring to 2 or 3 and practice devices to accomplish this purpose, they are guilty of iniquity which eventually must be punished. Unfortunately, this evil doctrine is being taught as a virtue by many people who consider themselves cultured and highly educated. It has even crept in among members of the church and has been advocated in some of the classes within the church. It should be understood definitely that this kind of doctrine is not only not advocated by the authorities of the church, but also is condemned by them as wickedness in the sight of the Lord. So, can anyone out there please explain to me whether that snippet that I just read from Doctrines of Salvation is a doctrine, a policy, or just culture? And now back to speaking about the Quorum of the 12. Let's listen to and discuss a few clips from Jeff Holland from Roots Tech that took place March 6th through 8th, 2025 in Salt Lake City, Utah. Here is the first one.
I'd say this to the audience. In my experience, and this isn't doctrine, this is just me to you on Discovery Day, there's only one thing more powerful than a man talking about the priesthood, and that is a woman talking about the priesthood.
Wow, I'm so glad that he clarified quite emphatically that this is not doctrine. Was he afraid of giving the women too much credit or power? Weird, Jeff. That was weird. And now this clip.
In our last general conference, I spoke about prayer. I had had a near-death experience for 4 weeks. I was somewhere with a foot in another world.
Let's keep in mind that he was in the hospital, likely on some pretty serious medications, when he had this so-called near-death experience.
And the 2 lessons that I was given there, and in effect told to take back to the church, and now I speak as much more to adults than the children. And those 2 lessons were...
The next thing that caught my attention was that he is sharing his takeaways from this at Roots Tech and not in conference. And yet he said, quote, "The 2 lessons that I was given there and in effect told to take back to the church," close quote.
Pray more than you pray. And I thought I prayed all the time, more or less. But the lesson was pray more than you pray. However much you've prayed, pray more. And in however many places you've prayed, pray in more places. However many times during the day you pray more times in the day. And it started to give meaning to me, an overwhelming meaning to me, that there really was significance, there really was meaning. It was quite literal when God had said, pray always, pray always. And I thought that meant just kind of be serious about it. Well, it is to be serious about it, and a lot more. I took that to be part of this hastening, the hastening of the work, the hastening of family history, and every other aspect of our work, missionary work and all else. But we're to do this that you portrayed, Neil. We're to pray more and in more places and more often than we do. And if you've prayed a lot, pray more.
Pray. Wow, what a new and exciting revelation. We haven't heard this before, so it's really great that Heavenly Father saw the need to grace you, Jeff, on your almost deathbed with that shocking and much-needed revelation. When Heavenly Father could have told you anything, that is what He wanted you to know. He sounds very powerful.
The other lesson was to testify, to be a witness. And however much you testify more. However many people you meet and declare the gospel of Jesus Christ to, however many that is, it's got to be more. And so, thank you. That's not an invitation I knew I'd have, but I care very much about it.
Testify. Equally as new and needed. It's a good thing that every member a missionary wasn't ingrained into me starting when I was a child, or the vision to testify would seem somewhat overdone and mundane.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you so very, very much for sharing that very personal experience.
And then Neil says, I think to clarify, because he's maybe embarrassed by Jeff's admission, thank you so much for sharing that very personal experience. Almost as if to say, remember, Jeff and everyone, some experiences are too sacred to share, and maybe this was one of those. Now let's go to an update on the Cody, Wyoming temple, which has been much contested by members of the Cody community because of its location, height, and size. A Facebook post dated March 6th on Temples of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints says, with the prefabricated modules installed for the Cody, Wyoming temple, work is progressing on framing the building's upper structures, including the steeple that will rise 101 feet above the ground level. The steeple will feature stained glass windows in the upper and lower sections with with backlighting turned on in the evenings. Visitors are welcome to the construction site where a senior missionary couple will provide information. Notice the photo they included in this post, making it look like the temple's not that big or obstructing any views. Now look at this photo where the same temple, that still has quite a few feet that need to be added to the steeple, is already ruining the view for residents. Now let's talk about another church survey that says the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will be hosting a discussion to gather feedback on potential design concepts for the guest experience at Liberty Jail. We would like to gather perspectives of those who are familiar with the site, as well as those who are unfamiliar but interested in visiting a historical or religious location. If you would be willing to provide your thoughts and feedback to an online discussion board, please take this short preliminary survey. Participants selected for this discussion will be sent a $100 electronic gift card as a token of our appreciation. We have partnered with Cicero, an independent research group, to conduct this research. Your participation will provide helpful guidance for future guest experience design efforts. Thank you in advance for your time. Sincerely, David Arrington, Correlation Research Division, The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For more information about research studies in the church, see General Handbook, Serving in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So of course I had to go to that section in the handbook. It is 38.8.37 and it says Research in the Church. The purpose of church research is to gather reliable information to support the deliberations of general church leaders. The Correlation Research Division, CRD, is the only authorized research agency of the church. CRD may also contract with third-party agencies to conduct research. Is this because they aren't being given reliable info from, God, who they claim to speak for? I also love that it says deliberations. When I was growing up, my dad would often point out how awesome the Mormon church was because they didn't have to deliberate like the churches that made the Nicene Creed. Sorry, Dad, but I think you were misinformed. Now let's go to Fox 10 Phoenix, where it says Lorie Vallow Daybell is asking a judge not to allow cameras in the courtroom during her upcoming murder conspiracy trial in Arizona. The so-called Doomsday Mom filed an objection against media coverage, specifically naming Court TV in the document. Court TV should be ashamed of its very nature and its request, since its sole objective is not to bring people real news or facts, but instead its objective is to entertain the public with the very true life tragedies that happen in real people's lives, Vallow Daybell wrote in the court document. Vallow Daybell is representing herself in the Charles Vallow trial, which is scheduled to begin on March 31st. Now let's look at this most encouraging and wonderful text message showcased on the Ex-Mormon subreddit. It was sent by someone trying to solicit members to clean the church building for free so the billion-dollar Mormon corporation does not have to pay professional cleaners. It says, "Good evening. I hope your week has been going well. Quick follow-up. Over 50 people have been invited to come help clean tomorrow and only 3 have committed. Please let me know if you can make it. You'll be blessed for your efforts." The person who posted it added this, "I don't feel bad for not helping, but I do feel bad for leaving this guy on red. I truly can't think of anything nice to say." Takeaway from this, 94% of people asked to clean the church said no. And now, today, let's finish up with this great quote by Hank Smith, who is a pro-LDS influencer, but in this case seems to be advocating against the church. He says, "Don't allow anyone to repeatedly lie to you, use guilt or shame to make you help them, demand you rescue them from their lack of planning, use your time and money without gratitude, or treat you as less than an equal. Enabling bad behavior is not kindness." And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.